Hello, hello, hello. How are you? So, last week I did not go live. Last week was my birthday, so I was enjoying my birthday. But we have weekly conversations every Thursday. Community conversations, relationship conversations, life conversations about different topics. This week, I want to touch on infidelity. I want to talk about how it affects us going forward. If anyone wants to share their story, you can drop it below in the comments. But this topic derived from actually a podcast that I actually watch. It's called Dear Future Wifey. Shout out to him. He had this couple, I forgot. He has different couples on there that talk about different things, but he talks about a lot of different topics. So if you want to know and follow this guy that has this podcast, his name is, I don't want to chop his name up, but am I saying that right? I don't know if I'm saying that right. But either way it goes, Dear Future Wifey is mom. And so he talked about this couple, and I'm giving context to the post that I put up earlier. And it was this guy who was taught, his name is Keith. Keith and Raven Hartwell, they were having a discussion on the Dear Future Wifey podcast. The context to their story is that she was unfaithful in their marriage and he forgave her. And so, when they came out with their story, a lot of women were going ham on her, and then a lot of men were coming at him because, it's not common for men to, I'm going to say in society, it's not common for men to stay in relationships where women have cheated. However, it is common for women to stay in relationships where the man has cheated. So I've talked about, infidelity in the past, and I touched upon the deeper rooted issues in the past, but this podcast actually was really interesting, this topic, because he touched on something that, I didn't talk about previously when he was saying that he forgave her and decided to move forward in their marriage. They've been married for almost 10 years. And so a lot of couples deal with infidelity in their relationships. So I kind of wanted to talk about this and get people's opinions on, either how they moved forward in the relationship or how they move forward in other relationships. And so going back to what I posted, he was talking about how, he basically forgave her for her infidelity, which actually happened in the beginning of their relationship. Hello. And well, I would say the first couple years of their marriage. They got married really young. And so, and I'm just giving context to the post so then I can go into the conversation. So, it happened. She told him right after, it happened. And, they worked through it, but she also touched upon some of the things that was happening in their relationship during that time. They were in two different states. They were having, arguments and not being able to communicate with one another. And here comes this person where she's able to communicate with, which, they shared stories. And then there was the incident that happened with them cheating. And so she had to, didn't have to, but she did. She came and, called her husband, told him, what she had done. And he, they went from there. But I found it interesting, their story, because they both come from Christian backgrounds. His background, he had I would say, more functional household, because his dad gave him the life lessons and talked to him, about basically being a man. So it actually helped him to have a foundation and do things in a different manner than if he had not had his father there. And then for her, she comes from a Christian home, but her home was dysfunctional, where her dad, 1 minute would do nice things for her mom, and then the next minute it would be volatile. And so she talked about the reason why they got together was because of the way that this guy treated her. Her husband treated her from the beginning. Hello. And so I'm just adding context to the post that I posted so we can go into the conversation. But so she was just talking about how he treated her, how she loved the way that her husband treated her in the beginning. And so, but when they got married, things shifted because he was playing ball, because they were still in college. They got married at 20 years old. He was playing ball, so he was in California. She was in Las Vegas. They were in two separate places. He was going through his own stuff and had actually just torn, had just torn a, did he say his meniscus or something? So he winded up losing like scholarships and stuff that he thought was going to come through. Like he winded up losing things. So he was at a place in his life where he was just going through, and for her to come, and he was kind of lashing out, so for her to come and tell him this was kind of like the icing on the cake of the things that were happening, all of the bad things that was happening at that time, right? So he was not fully present in the relationship at that exact time. So I'm just giving the context now. So she, stepped out of their marriage, and quite often in relationships, male and female, yes, on the male and female side. I'm sorry, a call came through. But this is something that's common in relationships where, someone is less attentive than they used to be. Or, someone is dealing with their own struggles and not being vocal or not understanding how to express how they're feeling or what they're going through in the relationship, and then they step out of the relationship because for a lot of people it's easier to not deal with the issues, right? It's easier to have a relationship and not actually deal with the actual issues. It's easier to just be with that person and enjoy the good moments rather than, deal with when things go left. And so for a lot of people, they wind up stepping outside of their relationship because it's a listening ear. It feels good for the moment. That person does not have to or does not see the flaw of them. It's easier to do a lot of things when people don't see the real you or have to deal with the real you on a 24-hour 365 days of the week basis, like days of the year, I should say. So it's easier to be around someone who does not have to, you all don't have to do anything else but just be in the moment. It's harder to have a relationship when, you know, you have to actually deal with your ish. Like, a lot of people don't want to deal with it. They want to mask it with other things. And I think that that's one of the major issues that has happened in relationships, or even now in dating, even in marriage. People don't realize the work that goes into it. And I've talked about this previously, that relationships are work. It's another, like a 9-to-5 job where you have to put in the time and the effort, the thoughts, you have to nurture it, because if you don't nurture it, then nothing's going to come from it. That's just like when you decide that you want to build something. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes dedication with whatever it is that you decide to build. It does the same thing when you're working a job. You start from the bottom, you put the work in, you put the time in. It's all the same. And so, but when it comes to relationships and you are actually in it, you know, they are going to see you at your best and they're going to see you at your worst. And so it takes a mature person to be able to handle those influxes that happen within a relationship, those highs and those lows. And marriage is where you see it all. Marriage is definitely where you see it all, because you can't escape. Like, and I think that a lot of people have a thought process of escape when it comes to relationships, and so, which makes marriage just more complicated, because people are like, well, I can't get out. I know I used to have that same thought process. That's why I talk about, you know, previously being engaged quite a few times, but never actually going through with it, because I had that fear, like, what if it doesn't work? What if they do X, Y, and Z? And then I'm stuck. Like, I'm stuck in this. I don't want to be stuck. So my mindset has shifted because I'm more mature in my thoughts. I'm more mature emotionally. But at the same time, you have to realize that as long as you're putting the work in, and as long as you're doing whatever you committed to, you know, and the person that you decide to get with, if they're doing what they committed to, then you all are on a good path, you know. But things happen. Everything's not going to be perfect. Nobody is perfect. And so this episode in this podcast was really interesting, because I haven't talked to men who have actually experienced this, but the way that he came back and the way that they came back from it, it's not something that people necessarily talk about. You have a lot of couples, old school couples, who have dealt with infidelity, and they don't talk about it as hush hush. I know that Ruby D once talked about her and her husband and what she dealt with. She dealt with some infidelity, but she dealt with it and she kept going. And so this is just an open conversation. So for you guys that are joining, you can drop in the comments, you know, your experience or whatever comments you have on this topic. But a lot of people deal with this in dating relationships, and I think that it funnels over into marriages. And I've talked about that in the past. When you don't have the discipline to be with one person in a dating relationship, how can you have the discipline to be with one person, stay committed, and exercise self-control in a marriage? Like, marriage is actual grown folks ish. Like, it really is, because it takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of self-work to actually make it work. And eventually on here, I want to have people that have been married for like 30, 40 years to talk about, how they did it, so that people, that are millennials and younger can get a better understanding of the foundation that's necessary, which for me, I would say, what I've observed is people that are rooted in God have better relationships. Like, if that relationship is rooted in God, they will have a better dating relationship, a better marriage. And so I've even experienced it even with my own parents. I talk about their relationship. Previously, I went into the history of my parents and the dysfunction that they had, and all of the different things that they experienced. Even talking to my mom and just observing as a kid in the household. And I didn't see major dysfunction in my household, which I'm grateful for. Like, my dad was very respectable. Like, he was respectful to my mom. They respected one another. There wasn't cussing each other out. Like, they had arguments, but their disagreements was not done in front of us. And he took her out on dates and brought her flowers. And when he, because he was a musician and he was away from home sometimes, where he would be playing, because he worked at night, my mom worked days. So he would be playing, at different places, different states, he's everywhere, right? Because that's the life of a musician. When you have gigs or you have to do studio sessions or whatever the case may be, you are not at home. So when he realized, I haven't been at home, I have been away from the kids, my wife, I even heard a voicemail that he left my mom. And my dad has been gone now for 23 years. The 11th actually made 23 years. But I heard a voicemail that he left my mom. And he was like, apologizing. He wrote her a letter to apologize, for not being present, because at this time, he was actually touring with this band that he was a part of. So stuff like that actually makes a difference in the relationship. Like, it really helps to cultivate the relationship where you are aware of the other person's feelings and you are having the conversations and being present. Because I would say now in dating, I've realized that there are a lot of men who are not emotionally aware. There are women who are not emotionally aware. People are just getting into relationships for the look or the sex, but it is more to it than that. And because people are getting into relationships just for the look or the sex, they wind up in situations where they decide to jump into a marriage and they're not fully prepared with everything that it comes with. And so now you have turmoil in the relationship because you haven't cultivated it in its dating stages. And so I will just speak on, years ago when I was in a relationship, and he cheated. This was how many years ago? We in 2022. Maybe about 6-7 years ago. And I will say, I didn't know off the bat. I felt something, and that's the other part I talk about. Women always have an intuition. I think men do too, low key. But I think because men are not taught to tap into it, that they don't really feel it how we feel it. But I felt it. I asked. I wasn't quite sure because I didn't have any evidence of anything, but I asked. So, and of course he denied it. And so, after a while, I was just like, okay, I know I'm not crazy. Something's going on. You're not going to sit here and make me look crazy. Like, make me feel like I'm the crazy one or whatever. And so, he never admitted to it until after we broke up. Like, after we broke up, he admitted to it. But his reasoning was because I told him that we weren't ready to get married after he asked. And I was like, that's really silly, because me telling you that was not a no. It was like not a right at this exact moment, because I feel like you are not ready. Like, we have not gotten to that place where I feel like we should move to that next stage, right? And so, when I did find out after the fact, I was pissed, because I'm like, here you are, I'm asking you to be honest with me, you won't be honest. And then you make me seem like, okay, it's all in my head, but it's really not. And then you tell me after the fact, like, we have a conversation after the fact, and then he's like apologetic. And it's just like, okay, but why you just didn't say this when I asked you? So for me, I could never trust the same again. Like, I'm gonna be honest, after that I never trusted him like I did before, because it was just like, I asked you, you lied about it, and then you come out with it after I break up. Like, after I'm like, okay, I'm not about to do this with you, because we should not be having this. I should not be feeling like this. And then you come out like, yeah. So he apologized, right? And we had the conversation. And, that's when he said, you basically rejected me. He felt rejected. So out of the feeling of rejection came the infidelity. And so I'm just like, well, if you had stayed and had the conversation, and we had the conversation, because after I said what I said, he left. He was upset. But instead of staying and having a conversation, you would have known why I said what I said. But it wasn't a no, it was a just not at this exact moment. And so he was like, I didn't understand that, and you didn't really say that. And I was like, okay, well, that was poor communication on my part, because I should have said something. And so after that point, like, and we talked about it extensively. We talked about going to counseling. We talked about all of these different things, but I never trusted that person the same. Like, the trust was like dead to me, because every time I looked at him, I saw whoever it was, even though I didn't know who the person was. But I'm like, I'm imagining him with somebody else. So it didn't work for me. Like, that part did not work, where I was just okay with it, and I told him I forgave him, but I couldn't get the image out my head, right? And so going forward, it just made me be like, I'm straight. Like, I can date, but I'm not gonna date seriously, because I don't feel like it's necessary. Like, and so, yeah, it just changed my view. So in a lot of these situations, hello, it makes you guarded. It makes you change your perspective on what you thought you once knew, right? For some people, it confuses them. There are just a lot of different emotions that people have when it comes to infidelity. But when you are dating, I feel like it's different from marriage, because once you in a relationship, it's like over. I mean, there's no real where we have to go through a divorce proceeding type of situation where we have to divide assets and all that kind of stuff. Whereas in a marriage, it's a low. So I feel like when it comes to it, it just makes it a little bit more complicated. And when I think back on marriages that I knew that people were, unfaithful or whatever, like when I was younger, I was probably like 20, 21, 22, and there was a few people that I knew that were, have been married for some time, and I was just like, okay, I'm not doing that. I don't see why they doing that. I'm not doing that. That ain't what's happening. But I realized, and even watching this podcast, and even because I have, gotten more in tune with God, that there is a for better or worse that happens. And when the worst happens, how do you handle it? And then how would you want somebody to handle you if you were in the same situation? Like, if you were the one who did the cheating, how would you want your spouse or significant other to handle you? And you have to look at it from the lens of, okay, well, I wouldn't want them to handle me this way, so maybe I should handle this a different way. Now, I will say with that ex, we were able to have the conversation after the fact, and we tried to get back together, but I'm telling you, it was hard for me to get past that. Like, I forgave him, but it was just like, in my head, there was an instant replay, It just did not work. But I don't know how I will respond if that happened in a marriage, but with me even being able to have the conversation, to me was really big, and to try to say, okay, let's try this again, was really big, because in the past, if anything that I thought was off, or I just felt like it wasn't gonna work, I just walked away. I didn't ask questions, I didn't have conversations, I didn't do anything. But that speaks to the growth in my communication and development and how I view relationships. And so a lot of people are not emotionally tapped in and don't know how to communicate when things are happening to them personally, and it comes out in the form of cheating or other things. And cheating is not just sex. It's not just the sexual part of it. You can cheat with somebody emotionally, and you can cheat with somebody financially, where you are hiding assets. You can cheat just in other ways. It's not, and I don't want to say necessarily cheat, because cheating is not a real concept in a relationship. Honestly, it is a break in trust. It's a break in trust, and I said this before in a previous live. And so, in looking at my experience, I'm not quite sure, like I said, whether or not I would be able to move forward like that in a marriage. It would depend. I can't speak on that. But looking at it from the biblical standpoint, and a lot of people will say, because I had someone that said that, cheating is grounds for divorce, biblically. It is. But you have a choice. Just like God gives us free choice to choose what we want to do. In our day-to-day life, we have a free choice. He does not force us to be one type of way, or to think a certain way, or just to be like a certain way. He gives us free choice. So, given that free choice, it is the same thing within the constraints of a marriage or a relationship. You are given choice. But in this case, where we were talking about marriage, the choice is whether to honor the commitment that you had between you and your husband, you and your wife, or to, go off and be with somebody else, maybe for a moment, a night. Even the conversations, there are conversations that are a break in trust. When you are having deep emotional conversations with someone who is not your spouse or significant other, where that person knows the ins and outs of your relationship, it's the same thing. But you are given a choice as to whether you want to move forward in that, or if you want to let it go. And so that is the out, but do you really want the out? Like, it's easier to have the out rather than to work through it. And so for this couple, she talked about the things that were going on with her. And I've heard other podcasts where women have explained like their daddy issues and all of these different things. And men are like, oh, that's an excuse. But let's just say if the shoe was on the other foot, because there are a lot of men that cheated. There are a gang of men that have cheated and will blame her, the walls, they didn't like the colors of something, stressful day, she's always nagging, the kids get on our nerves, my nerves, whatever. They will have like a gang of excuses. But when a woman is like, I have a daddy wound, I have these issues, and she's being honest, that still needs to be honored. Just like you will want her to honor whatever your reasoning is, you should be honoring her reasoning as well, because it's valid. Like, people have issues and they have stuff that they have not addressed, and a lot of times that stuff gets addressed in a marriage. That's why you have to be sure about what you're doing, because it will be addressed in the marriage if you're not addressing it before the marriage. And then you got to deal with it. You got to deal with the stuff. So all of that pain and all of the stuff that you swept under the rug from, abuse and mistrust and your mommy issue, your daddy issue, abandonment issues, whatever the case may be, that's stuff that needs to be addressed before you get into a relationship, and definitely before you get into a marriage, because all it's going to do is come up. It's going to come up in ways that you never thought. So, I'm sorry, my phone was really not that bad. Anyways, so those things come up and come out, and I was saying previously in a live where cheating is a symptom, it's of a greater problem. And it's a greater problem within that person, whether they need to feel validated, because you have some people who need to feel validated from, going out here and being in these streets and having different people tell them how handsome they look or wonderful they look, or whatever the case may be. So you gotta deal with your stuff. But the fact that he forgave her and did not make her feel like guilty in a way where he brought it up every time they were together. Like, he still treated her with the utmost respect is very admirable. And I know men will probably see this and go in, but if the shoe was on the other foot and you did it to your wife, 9 times out of 10 you would want her to stay with you. But so think about how you would want her to handle you if she found out you were cheating. So that is the same way, and we need to normalize that. If you can't do something, if you can't dish it, if you can't take what you're dishing, don't do it. We need to normalize that, because it's so many people out here doing stuff that they can't even take. So then why are you doing it? If you don't want it done to you, if you don't want to feel the backlash from it, if you don't want to feel the pain that comes with it, don't do it. That's it. Because everything that you put out there, it has to come back. And I don't really think people understand that it has to come back. But when it comes back, how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to address it? And so I wanted to delve in, and I think that I'm going to make this a 2-part where we talk about this in a second part next week, about how to move forward, or even how people moved forward in their relationships, because forgiveness is really big. And I've talked about it before. I've talked about forgiving your parents. I've talked about forgiving people that wronged you. I've talked about forgiveness on multiple occasions. It's on my YouTube channel, Crown Convos with Tiana and Michelle. Go on there, you can see the previous conversations that I have had. But forgiveness is key. And once you forgive, the goal is not for the other person to abuse that, because when you repeat, and I call this a repeat offense, when you go and you ask for forgiveness and then you turn around and do the same thing that you asked for forgiveness from, I feel like that's a repeat offense. And now you are doing this on purpose. Now you are purposely, hurting me, or now you are purposely trying to cause harm. I feel like, okay, now you are just violating me. You don't care. And there are people that do that. Like, they'll ask for forgiveness just for the sake of saying, I said I was sorry. There's people that do that. And it's not genuine. But the fact that he, forgave her and she never repeated that is something to be said with that. And that, even though that situation is unfortunate, I feel like that was a learning lesson, even for me, because I'm like, as a woman, I don't know if I could be the way that he was, where he forgave and just was like, okay, this is my wife. I'm still going to honor her. I'm still going to respect her at the end of the day. And I'm still going to move forward in the marriage. But he was looking at the biblical principles of marriage, because it is an honoring and a respect. And I talked about this previously, and it's in Colossians, how you are supposed to submit one to another, how the man is supposed to love his wife like, he loves his own body, and like Christ did the church. There is just a lot of pieces to marriage, and the Bible talks about it in different places, but where you all are supposed to honor one another, and you're going to fall short. And I will say this, I think that there is a perfection that comes along with the image that people have on how relationships should be, or how marriage should be. People think that it is supposed to be perfect, and it is not. You're not going to be the perfect person. You are not going to be with the perfect person. But the goal is to have that perfection within the relationship where you all are doing what is perfect for the both of you. You know, where you create a sense of security for the both of you, even outside of your flaws and your misfortunes and whatever is going on. We have to understand that nobody is perfect, but you can create a perfect environment for your relationship. You're not going to do the right things at every time, at every accord, but to actually see that person. Like, I even have this thing up here, but I don't know if you can see behind me, but seeing people the way that God sees them is very key in all relationships, right? To see people the way that God sees them puts them in it humanizes them, but it also says, you know, I understand that you're not going to do everything right, and so I will still do life with you. I will still be by your side. I will still, you know, fight for you. I will still be there when you need me. That type of thing, when you are seeing your partner the way God sees you or them. So I feel like that's very key in a relationship. And so I do want to do a part 2, hello to this conversation next week, where I want people to actually tell me about, you know, whether or not they actually, you know, haven't cheated on or did do the cheating, and what the outcome was, and how they even operated going forward. Did it make you not want to be in relationships going forward? Did you take time to heal or to get counseling for yourself? To did you take time to figure out what it is that you need for yourself, if you know, for the future, just for if you're trying to move forward, or if you're trying to figure out why you did it, or whatever the case may be. Like, did you take that time to try to get to know yourself better and to figure out why you did what you did, or why you stayed in that relationship of repeated cheating? Because some people do. Some people stay in those relationships where there is repeated cheating. I don't know how they do it, but I want to have this conversation. I want to see. And then how I do want to ask men, because a lot of men that have different podcasts have talked about, like, nah, man, why would I forgive that? Why would I, you know, that's simp behavior. But no, if you want a functioning relationship, you just have to understand that things are not going to go perfectly. Like, you have to understand that she has flaws just like you have flaws. You expect her to be perfect, but then you come with your flaws. Or she might, because there are women who expect men to be perfect. That man is not going to be perfect. He's going to have flaws, just like you have flaws, you know. But the point is to create a life of purpose, to build, to love one another, to have a healthy relationship. The other part is, I don't even think people realize, because this was another part of it that I was thinking about, where if you are, you know, having multiple relationships, and for some people it leads to multiple kids, it's harder to build wealth. It is harder to build stability when you have multiple situations going outside of one household, which really is why marriage is really important to do. Because it cuts down on the confusion of a lot of what we see today, where you have all of these children outside of the household, and you have men who are paying child support for multiple kids, 6, 7, 8 kids. And, you know, when he's wanting to settle down, it's like, how is that possible with all of this money going out the door? And people have to think about that. Women have to think about that too, because you have all of these kids with these different men, and then there's no stability because men are coming in and out of your life, of your kids' life, but your money is coming in and out, and you having to deal with all these different personalities and all of these different things rather than settling down with one person. That was one of the thoughts that came to me as I was watching this, because I'm like, in this situation, you know, there were no outside kids that were created, but for other couples, there have been outside babies created in dating and in marriage. And so I want to know how they handled that. I want to know how they handled it, and what advice would you give someone wanting to get married, someone that has gone through this situation and maybe they're on the fence? Like, what advice would you give? I do want to post his advice to men, which I'll probably do that tomorrow. I'll post the tidbit that he gave. But I would like to know for part 2, what advice, if you've been married or if you've gone through this situation or whatever the case may be, like, what advice would you give someone? How did you handle it? And how are you planning on moving forward in your own life? Like, I would like to know the opinions of people that have gone through it, because I know for me in that dating situation, I just was like, this is not gonna work. I don't know if the same would be true had he and I got married. I might have possibly been like, okay, I need time, and then worked it out, because had I said yes to him, we would have been married. So at some point, you know, it could have happened within the constraints of a marriage. So I might have gave it time, and then we worked it out, but I just couldn't, in dating, I couldn't get past that. Hello. So I want to know what you all think. So we're going to do a part 2 to this conversation, because some of you all did not drop anything in the comments, but you were on, so I thank you for joining. But I would like to know what your thoughts are on this topic of, you know, infidelity, and how, you know, you navigated it, or how to move forward. What advice would you give if you were the one that cheated, or if you were the one that got cheated on? What was your experience, and what would you tell someone in your same situation? So we're going to do part 2 next week, Thursday at 8 p.m. So come back. I'm actually going to post this to my YouTube channel, Crown Convos with Tiana and Michelle. So you'll be able to go over there and you can see previous conversations and previous topics that were kind of similar to this, because I kind of delved into the psychology behind infidelity. So you can actually see that on my YouTube channel. So I will see you back here next week, Thursday at 8 p.m. You all have a great night. Bye.